You have to hold on. We're
Every
almost
street
out
lamp
of
looked
time.
suspended in glass. Inside, however, the building lived in its own rhythm. Machines beeped softly, nurses walked briskly through corridors, and the air carried that mix of antiseptic and hope that hospitals never quite shake off. In room 417, an elderly widow named Mary Langley lay resting. Her silver hair framed her gentle face, and though age had softened her features, there was still something about her that looked strong, solid, like a tree that had weathered many storms. Her husband had passed 5 years earlier, and their only daughter, Olivia, visited as often as her job allowed. Tonight had been another visit filled with warm smiles, a few jokes, and promises to return early the next morning. But Mary wasn't completely alone in the world. She had one more protector, one whose legend still lingered in military circles, a man known for a quiet intensity, unshakable calm, and a mind that turned danger into a solved puzzle. Her father, a retired Navy SEAL, at 91, no one at the hospital knew much about him. Staff had only seen him occasionally, an old man walking with a cane, slow but dignified, his eyes alert in a way that made even the busiest nurse pause. Those who noticed him assumed he was fragile, but there was nothing fragile about Samuel Reed, a man who had spent decades carrying out missions that were never recorded in any book. Age had thinned him, yes, but something in him hadn't aged at all. His awareness, his instinct, his refusal to let danger slip past unnoticed. He lived in the house right next to Mary's and visited her every evening without fail. And tonight, as he sat reading a worn book in the lobby, sipping his weak black coffee, he had no idea that his daughter's life would be threatened within the hour. He only knew one thing. Something in the air felt wrong. He sensed patterns. He sensed tension. And tonight, the halls felt off. On the 5th floor of the same hospital, a man named Rylan Knox moved through the hallway with the slow confidence of someone who believed nobody was watching him. His clothes were clean, his expression neutral, his steps soundless. He blended in so perfectly with the environment that even the security guard glanced at him only once. But Rylan was not a visitor. He was a thug with a history no one knew about, someone hired to silence a witness in a financial crime case. He had no intentions of stealing, no dramatic motives. He was simply here to do a job. Cold, quick, quiet. His target, Mary Langley. She had unknowingly become a threat after overhearing a conversation in her bank involving Rylan's boss. She didn't know what she had heard. She had simply mentioned it casually to her daughter. Her daughter worked at the DA's office. The authorities moved fast. A case had opened before Rylan's crew even realized what had gone wrong. Tonight, they were correcting it. Mary was asleep when Rylan entered her room. The hallway was empty. The night nurse was in the supply closet, stacking gloves and medicines. No one noticed that room 417's door closed more quietly than usual. Rylan approached her bed with the blank focus of someone who had done worse things before. No hesitation, no noise. He reached toward her with an intent that held no mercy. But Mary stirred, not fully awake, just enough to sense a presence. Her eyes fluttered, barely opening, and she whispered, "Olivia." Her voice was frail. Rylan stiffened. For a split second, something unexpected flickered across his face. Not compassion, not guilt, but annoyance. He didn't want a conversation. He didn't want her awake. He reached forward, moving to silence her in the quickest way he knew. He didn't notice the soft shuffle of steps outside the hallway. He didn't notice that Samuel Reed, Mary's father, had stood up in the lobby 10 minutes earlier because something inside him told him to check on his daughter. He didn't notice that the very man he was about to harm was someone who had been trained his entire life to hear danger long before it struck. Samuel walked slowly, leaning on his cane, but his eyes were razor sharp. Every minor sound mattered. Every footstep told a story. And as he neared the 4th floor corridor, something struck him instantly. The silence. Not normal silence. A wrong silence. The kind he had known on missions, just before an ambush. His pace changed. His cane struck the floor with increasing precision, not speed. Samuel wasn't reckless. He had never been reckless. He approached room 417 with the same calm he had used decades ago entering unknown buildings on foreign soil. Rylan leaned closer to Mary, his hands tightening. Mary felt it. She tried to speak, but her voice came out in a weak rasp. Please, don't. Rylan froze only when the door clicked open behind him. A soft click, barely a sound, but to Samuel, that was all he needed. The old man stood in the doorway, his posture straightening in an instant. His cane remained in front of him, but his eyes, those steel blue eyes that once scanned battlefields, locked onto the stranger standing over his daughter. Rylan turned. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to narrowed suspicion. What do you want, old man? He whispered harshly. Samuel didn't answer. He looked at Mary. She was frightened, struggling to speak. He returned his gaze to Rylan. You're in the wrong room, Samuel said softly. Rylan stepped forward. Walk away, old man. This has nothing to do with you. Those words were the final mistake. Samuel Reed had lived through situations that made this moment feel almost quiet by comparison. He didn't panic. He didn't shout. He didn't tremble. Instead, he tapped his cane lightly on the floor. Once, like a pre-mission signal he hadn't used in decades. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. It has everything to do with me. That's my daughter. Rylan blinked, stunned. Daughter. The woman in the bed looked old. This man was ancient. How? Before he could finish the thought, Samuel moved. It wasn't fast. Not the speedy reflexes of a young soldier, but it was decisive. Efficient. Exact. He stepped sideways, angling himself between Rylan and the bed. Rylan, thrown off, lunged forward, assuming the old man would crumble under pressure. Samuel shifted his weight, catching the motion with surprising steadiness. His cane wasn't just for walking. It was custom-crafted, reinforced, and balanced. A tool, a partner, a weapon when needed. He lifted it, hooked it around Rylan's wrist, and twisted. Not violently, not aggressively, just enough to redirect force. Rylan lost balance. He stumbled. Samuel stepped forward, using his shoulder to push the younger man off-center. Rylan crashed into a nearby chair, not hurt, just stunned. How? Rylan hissed, scrambling up. His confidence cracked for the first time. Samuel didn't answer. He lowered his stance slightly, cane angled. Rylan charged again, this time with more intent. But Samuel anticipated it. He had spent decades learning to stay calm under pressure, to read motion like language. He sidestepped. Rylan missed again. And when he turned, breathless with irritation, a voice filled the room from the doorway. Security. Step back. The night nurse had returned and seen everything. Within seconds, hospital security rushed in. They weren't armed like soldiers, but they were trained well enough. They restrained Rylan and pulled him away from the bed. Mary was breathing rapidly, shaken but alive. Rylan, angry and defeated, glared at Samuel. You're lucky they came. Another second and Samuel stepped closer, leaning just slightly on his cane. His eyes didn't blink. You were finished the moment you entered her room, he said quietly. You just didn't know it. Rylan looked away. Security dragged him out of the room. The moment the door closed, Samuel exhaled. His body trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline leaving his system. The long years weighed on him again. His back bent slightly. His breath came slower. He walked to Mary's bedside. She reached for his hand. You saved me, she whispered tiredly. Samuel shook his head. I just came at the right time. But Mary knew better. She squeezed his palm gently. You always do. Within minutes, Olivia arrived after being called by the hospital staff. Her eyes widened with terror when she saw the aftermath, then overflowed with relief when she hugged her mother tightly. Dad, she said, turning to Samuel with shaking voice, you shouldn't have fought him. What if something happened to you? Samuel smiled softly. For family, he said, you don't think about what might happen. You just act. The police arrived, taking statements and gathering details. They assured Mary and Olivia that the man would face serious charges, including attempted harm and interference with an ongoing investigation. Justice would be thorough. As dawn began to paint pale gold across the sky, Mary finally drifted into peaceful sleep. Olivia sat beside her, holding her hand. Samuel remained standing for a moment longer, watching the calm rise in the room after the storm. He finally stepped toward the window, looking out at the early morning light. The battlefields of his past were far behind him. But the instinct to protect, that stayed, even at 91, and as long as he lived, no danger, no matter how quiet, how subtle, or how unexpected, would ever take his family from him. He turned back to the room. His daughter was safe. His granddaughter would arrive soon. And for the first time that night, he allowed himself to sit down, lean back, and close his eyes with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had completed one last mission. A mission no one else knew existed. A mission only a father could carry.